Good morning and welcome to Sunday School. We are continuing in our series, Introduction to Black Theology. We are joined today by a guest live in our studio. This is Ava Claire Maddox. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a college student at Auburn University. I am majoring in social work, and my concentration of study is in incarceration.
All right, so you may know Ava Claire as one of our youth ministry interns, but she also serves with the ministry in Sawyerville in Greensboro, Alabama. We're excited to tell you a lot about that and how the young people at Sawyerville are interpreting and praying about this moment. We'll get to that in just a second. I'm going to give you a brief recap of some of what we've talked about in the past few sessions. So over in the comments, you can see a link to Sawyerville's Race Relations Project, which is what we'll be talking about today. So in the past few sessions, we've talked about an introduction to Black theology using the work of Howard Thurman and the book Jesus and the Disinherited. So the operational definition for Black theology that we've been using is Black theology contends that dominant cultures have corrupted Christianity, and the result is a mainstream faith-based empire that serves its own interests, not God's. Black theology affirms Blackness and Black ways of knowing. I used a definition from a professor at the University of Chicago, Professor Dwight Hopkins, to narrow down the context to Black Theology USA. So this is to say, we're talking about a USA-specific context. This does not represent, for example, Tewahedo, the Ethiopian Christian Church, African Christianity, Afro-Caribbean Christianity, and we're going to narrow it down even farther today to talk about Black theology and lived experience in Alabama. We're going to talk about how what resources our young people have been using to think, to pray, and to get involved. So we're talking about, Howard Thurman, it was really interesting to me that he's cited as inspiring the Southern Freedom Movement, which is womanist theologian Ruby Sales' term for the civil rights movement. She says it's about freedom of the heart and soul and freedom to worship God, not just about legal rights, but that is absolutely included. Thurman lived and worked in Massachusetts and San Francisco, so while he inspired the Southern Freedom Movement, his work addresses the whole United States. So another thing we talked about with Black theology is it doesn't assume white people as an audience, but it says anyone can and should be a student of this theology, which is a theology of the church. So let's get started. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Race Relations Project came together, who participated, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you organize, how all the participants organize the conversation. So yeah, how did it start? How did it come about?
So Sawyerville summer camp started in 1993 in Greensboro, Alabama. But obviously this summer it looked a little bit different, and we had Camp in a Box, which we took donations and we packed the supplies this summer in Birmingham and then took it all down to Greensboro, and we had different delivery locations, but we also had COVID testing, and we had different committees for Sawyerville. So when the killing of George Floyd happened, we kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and nothing was really happening. Just companies out of nowhere, you were getting emails saying, this is what we say about the killing of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and then Breonna Taylor. And in the mission statement of Sawyerville, it says to improve race relations in Alabama. And so myself and Deontay and Hakeem and Thomas kind of got together and said, we need to come up with a statement. And that's where it originally started. And then it kind of snowballed from there, and we started the panels, which are on YouTube, and we also started a Google form on the website where people can send in prayers and then the questions for the panels.
So tell us about the breakdown of the panels. How many did you do, and what different populations did you gather together?
So we have high school staff, we have former and, well, it was present Sawyerville staff, we have community leaders and clergy. And the clergy is Episcopal priests and Glenda Curry, and also a priest from Greensboro. And then the high school staff is from Tuscaloosa, Montgomery, some private and public schools, Greensboro, and then the community leaders were two college professors. One is one of my professors. She teaches social work courses, and then the other one is a public health professor at Appalachian State, and a special education teacher in Greensboro, Alabama.
Thank you. So when I watched these panels this summer, something immediately stood out to me in the first few minutes. The students talked about how they gathered and the expectations for this conversation. I've asked Dana Claire to tell us a little bit more about Brave Space. She'll read to you a manifesto for how that works. And I think, just like a broad tangent here, I find that sort of there's been like a panic dialogue around like safe spaces in higher education. And in my work with young people, I really don't hear some of the principles that panic or anxiety is based in. I hear a commitment to rigor. For example, in the Sawyerville panels, all the students were told, if you cite something, it must be from a credible source. And I think these are just great ways to have difficult conversations. So tell us about how to be a brave space.
So we read an invitation to Brave Space before every panel, and in a lot of my classes we talk about how not having the conversations around race just makes it even worse. Mm-hmm. And so an invitation to Brave Space, that's just making it known that it's not going to be perfect, and so you're just invited to learn even more, and it's okay. So, you want me to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Together we will create a brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in a real world, and we carry scars, and we all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. and we will work on it side by side.
Awesome, thank you. And remind me of the source where we found this.
So this is by Mickey Scott Bay Jones, and it's just called An Invitation to Brave Space.
All right. So, thank you for our patience with our mask charades. So, as these conversations unfolded, I thought it was very interesting how you asked everyone in the room, everyone in the Zoom, both white and Black students, to talk about what were some entry points for them into this conversation. What had they grown up knowing? What had they grown up thinking about? And what were formative names and experiences for them? I don't want to ask you to speak for anyone else or speak over anyone else, but I would like to hear your reflection on that, because I heard a lot of powerful words, and we are the recap and we are the reflection. You can find everyone in the link on the comments to the Sawyerville Race Relations. But yeah, just share some reflections on that.
So when I was talking to Gail this week, I think it kind of shocked you that I was 12 when Trayvon Martin died. So Trayvon Martin was kind of a formative moment for me, but I also was very ignorant to the oppression in our country at the time still. And in the staff panel, I talk about that. And I didn't know until I got into the social work major at Auburn. And I still don't think I would have known. I mean, I may have educated myself more with the killing of George Floyd, but I honestly, I was so ignorant, and my privilege was showing for sure. So I went to, I went to the opening of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice my senior year of high school. And that was my first glimpse at the movement from slavery to mass incarceration. And then I was a forestry major when I got into college.
Oh,
and I took a diverse populations class just because, and that was very eye-opening. Mm-hmm. And then that was the first time I had heard the name Emmett Till. Mm-hmm. I never learned about that in my K through 12 learning. And if you don't know who Emmett Till is, he was hung and beaten and just brutally murdered for a crime he did not commit, and he was a child in Mississippi. And so then his mother took his body through the country to show the injustice. And that was the first time I had heard his name when I got to college. And I never learned, I mean, I talk about it in the video, and a couple of the other panelists talk about it, that it was just kind of like MLK and Rosa Parks, and then you put a bow on it and racism was over. And that's just not the case. So my eyes were opened when I got to college about white privilege, and I didn't even know that that was a thing. So
I think so. I in in Virginia, the educational experience I had there was sort of like the triumphalist history of civil rights. And I don't remember, it was a few years ago. I was listening to a podcast about Pauli Murray, who you will find is listed at, Pauli Murray was a civil rights lawyer and Episcopal priest. And in her time in Richmond, she started a bus boycott that inspired the work of Rosa Parks. And I can't remember, I was listening to this podcast and it was talking about Rosa Parks' history in community organizing. And I think, we had just been taught that Rosa Parks was tired, as opposed to Rosa Parks was part of a organized, thoughtful, and prayerful movement. When you talked about Mrs. Till bringing her son's body all around the country, that reminded me of the way we meditate on the brokenness of Christ's body on the cross in Christian art, and the way that we find that convicting for our hearts and lives. Yeah, just thinking of that as you were talking. So one of the questions that was asked in these panels, whose idea was it, was when was the first time you had a sleepover of someone you had a sleepover or like socialized as kids with someone of a different race? How did that question come about? Because that question got very honest very quick. How'd that get in there?
So this was actually a question that was sent in, and this is kind of where the division comes in, and people talk about in the panel seeing the division at the lunch tables at school, and a bunch of us had not had sleepovers. So that was very eye-opening, and some people were like, my first sleepover was at Sawyerville. So yeah, they talk about how if you're not having these conversations with your Black friends, are they really your Black friends? Can you support them and make sure that they are okay? Because your Black friends are tired. They've been fighting this fight for so long. And so it's the white people that have to take over now.
Yeah, so when we talked about hatred in Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, one of the things we talked about is how hatred begins in contact without fellowship, contact devoid of the primary overtures of warmth, fellow feeling, and genuineness. He says it can also occur if there's sentimentality on the more powerful person's behalf, or only one person can set the terms of the interaction. He says this also happens in unsympathetic understanding. We look at someone and we think we understand them, but there is no sympathy. I really like Thurman's phrase of fellow feeling. There is no fellowship. So I think that question kind of got to the heart of it. And then something else the panelists talked about was the solution is beyond niceness. Can you say some more about that?
So one of my favorite videos is by Robin DiAngelo, and she says being nice is not going to fix racism. And she says that because you go to lunch with your Black coworker, just because you hang out, like that's not going to do anything. You have to be active. You have to go and do. You can't just be nice. You can't just say hello. It's beyond that. It's not speaking over them. It's not speaking for them. You listen to their voices and you amplify those. You're not speaking over them. You're not using that white privilege.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this when Howard Thurman, in the last session, when Howard Thurman talks about loving your neighbor across a power differential, and how it's not loving your neighbor if you're setting policies in place that undermine their flourishing. So Howard Thurman, in the high school panel, you all did a really interesting statistics. I don't want to say trick because I think that makes it sound like you were trying to gotcha people, but you weren't trying to do that. You're just trying to say like what we think is different, what we think we see may not be what's really happening. So can you tell us more? About that and how that was designed from a social work perspective?
So we have a tendency to say, oh yeah, my school is super diverse. My city is super diverse. And then if you look at the actual statistics, it's not as diverse as you think. So if you were to search Auburn right now, a lot of kids would say, oh, my school is about 50-50 black and white. And it would not. It would be maybe even 90% white. And so you can try that at home. Just look up population for Auburn, Alabama, and you can just in your mind say, I don't know, and it'll pop up. So
yeah, I think that is just really useful to look at when we think about the contexts that have been formative for us. That's a really great illustration of how we remember things like we might want them to be. Let's see. So another question that I really enjoyed in all of these panels is what resources do you recommend for people? So what was, tell me about the span there, because I was really impressed by all the thoughtfulness in that regard.
So they really change depending on who you ask. There were some that talk about racism in the church with clergy, and then Just Mercy was recommended through just about all of them. White fragility. Let's see, who else? Ibrahim is one of the good authors that writes a lot of race relation books. There's just a plethora, and if you click on any of the videos, they're either in the comments or just if you skip to the end, they just list them off. If you're looking for a good read or movies, they're all on there. So
yeah, something that I thought about a lot this summer and fall is when I say like Black theology and Black ways of knowing, and specify that the target audience for Black theology is not necessarily white people, but everyone can be a student of this kind of theology. Y'all recommended some fiction books, The Hate You Give. I think the just more entry points into someone else's imagination and experience. I've seen a lot of recommendations for Octavia Butler's Parable series, poetry, music, art. I think if we are intentional about where we spend our time and energy, then we will always learn more.
Yeah, it's super important to listen to other people's stories at this time, and it's just important to listen and not speak over anyone, because it's not about how I feel right now. It's just important to lift other voices up and make sure that they are being heard. So.
Oh, I see we have a comment. The comment section is always open to you. Waking Up White is an excellent book too. Yes, Lynette Ferguson talked to talked to a really large Zoom Sunday school class about her experience reading this book. She also talked about white fragility, which you mentioned too. As we sort of wrap up, one of the most striking parts for me was everyone on the panel sort of naming what they felt hopeful about. Can you sort of summarize that conversation for us? I guess I am putting you on the spot to represent the voices and views of all the young people. But if you could summarize and reflect on that for us.
Yeah, that's a lot.
We like broad questions here.
I think everyone was very hopeful about just places like Sawyerville and seeing the large outreach. I think it's important to keep the energy that was at the start of the movement, for sure. It's kind of dwindled down. And so I think just seeing the large reach is what everyone was very happy for, but especially the support when Sawyerville did make a statement and start with the prayers and our panel and stuff, and the people that we reached out to and they said yes to coming on to the panel. I think that was very uplifting, and so I think everyone was very happy with that.
All right. I'll have a few more announcements before we close out, and it is almost organ prelude time. Do you have any reflections that I haven't asked about, or any closing? I've just been putting you on the spot for the last 30 minutes. Yeah. All right. So one book, as we were talking about Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and George Floyd, that comes to mind is Black Bodies and the Justice of God, that Kelly Brown Douglas wrote in 2015. I've referenced it before, and I just cannot recommend it highly enough to you. She is the canon theologian of, she's an Episcopal priest, canon theologian of the Washington National Cathedral, and dean of the Episcopal Divinity School. Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God. And then 2 opportunities coming up. So in the first weekend in November, the college students will be making a prayer pilgrimage to the Equal Justice Initiative and Monument in Montgomery. And starting October 7th, we will have a women's book study on womanist theologian Dolores S. Williams' book, Sisters in the Wilderness. And she starts with the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar to talk about womanist God. Her phrase is womanist God talk, to talk about how womanist theology is different than feminist theology and sort of the intersection of racism, sexism, and power there. It's really affecting. I read it in one of my divinity school classes, and I'm really excited to talk about this with you. So email me at gail@holytrinitychurch.info if you're interested. It will be in person and on Zoom on Wednesday nights in October. All right, thank you. So there was a broad question here. Are there any books on Emmett Till? Has anyone written his story? Yes, bibliography coming. We'll put some books in the comment section that might interest you. Thank you. All right. I believe we are ready for our organ prelude. Thank you for tuning in to Sunday School, and Claire, thank you for being here. I really enjoyed this. You ready? All right. Enjoy your Sunday with the organ prelude. you.